and welcome to The Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm going to be diving into a topic that a lot of people have encountered, but might not always recognize right away. Today, I'm going to be talking about emotional vampires. Now, these are the type of people who really drain your energy. They manipulate situations to their advantage. They definitely thrive on constant drama. I'm sure every one of us knows a person like this. And in the lifestyle where deep connections and trust are key for a lot of us, they can be especially damaging here. Now, before we get into it, I want to take a moment to thank all of my listeners, both all of the new ones coming in, all of your questions, all of the returning listeners who keep coming back week after week. I appreciate everything. All of your support. It means the world to me. And if you do find value in what I do, whether it's my podcast, my writings on Fetlife or other platforms of social media, or the free resources that I offer, there is a donation link available if you'd like to contribute. As always, there's no pressure for any of that. It's there for those who just want to help keep this work going. Now, today's episode, this is going to be all about breaking down how emotional vampires show up in the lifestyle, the tactics they use, and most importantly, how to protect yourself from these people. Some of these behaviors can be really subtle at first, but over time, they really do wear you down. And we're going to unpack what to watch out for, how to recognize when someone is draining you, and how to set firm boundaries so you don't get pulled into their cycle. I've seen this happen over and over again, and it really doesn't matter where I've been, New York, Atlanta, California, the UK, Australia, South Korea, it doesn't matter. Places I've been or people I talk to, this happens, these trends with people happen time and time again. And people get sucked into these relationships or these dynamics or even just friendships with these types of people where they give and give and give, but the other person is just never satisfied. There's always some sort of crisis, some reason they need more from you. And if you ever pull back, suddenly you're the bad person. It can be quite exhausting. And, in our community where emotional investment is already high, this starts to take a really heavy toll on a lot of us. So, have you ever dealt with someone like this in the scene? Have you ever dealt with someone like this in your life? Maybe a partner, a mentor, just a friend who always seemed to take more than they gave? If so, I'd like to hear from you, get your thoughts on this. Drop me a comment, email me, hit me up with a DM after the episode. All right, so let's start with the basics here. What exactly is an emotional vampire, and what kind of behaviors should you be looking out for? Now that I've kind of set this all up for you, let's talk about what actually is an emotional vampire. These are people who leave you feeling drained after every interaction. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be the simplest tasks they ask you to do, right? All of a sudden, you coming over to just enjoy the football game turns into you building a fence and then you buying dinner. And when you don't, they make you feel guilty for it. These people they feed on other people's emotions. And it's not just that they're having a bad day or they're going through a rough patch. Everyone struggles sometimes, and I want to acknowledge that. And we all need that support. But emotional vampires, they take, and they have no intention of giving back. They feed off of attention, control, or validation. And if you're not careful, they pull you into their orbit before you even realize what's happening. At first, it might not seem so obvious. So, some might even come across as charismatic. They're deeply wounded or they're just misunderstood. They might frame their needs as reasonable but urgent. They'll say, hey, they've never met someone who gets them the way you do, or you're the only person who truly understands them. That kind of attention can feel good at first, and it makes you feel special, needed, or even important. But the moment you stop meeting their expectations, the tone shifts. Suddenly, you're cold, you're distant, you're not as supportive as they thought you were. And that's when the manipulation starts to kick in. Now, psychologically here, emotional vampires often struggle with deep-seated insecurities, but instead of working through them in a healthy way, they externalize everything. Every problem they have is caused by someone else. If they're unhappy, it's because somebody abandoned them. If they feel rejected, it's because others were cruel or unfair. And rather than any type of self-reflecting, they manipulate people around them into providing endless reassurance and attention or emotional labor. And if they don't get what they want, they resort to guilt, gaslighting, or outright emotional punishment. And this is where things can get tricky here. Most people don't recognize they're dealing with an emotional vampire until they've already been drained. You might start feeling like you're constantly walking on eggshells, or that no matter how much you give, it's just never enough. The emotional vampire here subtly shifts the dynamic so that you feel obligated to keep showing up for them. And that's kind of the important part, right? You're obligated, even at your own expense. And if you finally decide to step back, they'll either double down on the guilt tripping, or they find somebody else to feed off of and they discard you, which then perpetuates the cycle of damage and hurt and harm that they're causing. Now, there are different types of them, and there is no one-size-fits-all version here of this type of, emotional vampire. They come in a lot of different forms, but there are a few common types you'll see, especially within our community. The first one, this is the perpetual victim. This is the person who always has a crisis. Nothing is really never their fault, and they always need to be saved somehow. Their dominance too harsh, their submissive is too selfish, their last 5 relationships were toxic, but somehow the pattern seems to point back to them. They thrive on playing the wounded party, and if you set any type of boundary, they guilt trip you, because how could you possibly abandon them when they're suffering? We hear these things time and time again from these people. They reinforce these ideas and let us know that somehow we are the ones doing this to them, so we in turn lower our boundaries and defenses and let them in. And, you feel sympathetic for them at first. Most people do. But over time, you realize it's not just bad luck. It's truly a cycle here. The moment one crisis is resolved, another one pops up to take its place. They get attention, emotional support, or validation from playing the victim. And if you stop engaging, suddenly you're the villain in their story. Oh my God, Chris abandoned me. He didn't want to show up. He didn't want to help me out. How could he do this? He's such a terrible person. And they perpetuate the story to each next person until there's such a trail of destruction behind them that those people end up coming together to heal after the damage that was caused and then eventually take this person down. The key issue here, though, is externalized responsibility. Perpetual victims struggle to take any accountability for their role in conflicts, and instead of them recognizing any type of pattern, they look for people who will reinforce their beliefs that they are always the one being wronged. And in the lifestyle, we see this quite often, and it makes them incredibly difficult to deal with because they use the language of consent violations or abuse or emotional safety to manipulate others into siding with them, even when the facts don't really add up. And I'm not saying that these things don't happen, but they're weaponizing different words, or they'll even throw racism in there or bigotry or anything else to deflect, so they are no longer the center of the problem that they've created. They push it on everyone else. Which then leads us to the next archetype here, the narcissist. Now this emotional vampire type thrives on admiration and control. They're charming at first to draw people in with confidence and authority. They might position themselves as a leader in the scene, a mentor, or a true dominant or submissive who knows better than everyone. But over time, everything starts to revolve around them, their needs, their wants, and their expectations. Now recently, about a year ago, not even that, in about the last 6 months, a quote-unquote dominant who had this flair for writing erotica, which turned out to be plagiarized and stolen, so he was a thief, from Australia, this ended up happening. Every time someone called him out, what ended up happening was that he would block that person, instantly from his posts so no one could see and no one could respond. And this person kept doing this, and he had been doing this on social media. He's not just on or he no longer on Fetlife, but he was doing it on Instagram and I think Twitter. He went by the handle of Aussie Primal. At one time, he actually stole work of mine, and I called him out for it. And the same thing happened to me. He blocked me. He went back and changed enough of the wording, and to call it his, but it wasn't. It was still stolen. It was plagiarized work. Well, eventually, between that and manipulating women, he was caught. And it all exploded, and I think he's been removed from multiple platforms. I don't know if he's still there. It doesn't really bother me that I'm calling him out, because this is the type of person. He's a narcissist. He's full of himself. He didn't write anything that he posted. He stole a lot of his content. That makes him a thief, and that makes him a plagiarizer. Makes him the type of person that damages the lifestyle. But he's only reflective of himself, not a country or not the lifestyle community as a whole. But see, this is the type of example. These type of people manipulate through their guilt or their flattery, and this is how this type of example he moved between women, shifting between overly complimentary to, subtly making women feel like they owed him something. And the moment they stopped giving attention or any admiration, in this example, he would lash out or he discarded people. And if you do this enough times, right, if you do end up giving in to people like this and you give them what they want, the goalposts constantly move no matter how much validation they receive, because it's never enough. And, all of you know me, and there's going to be some comments coming in here. Oh my God, you named somebody. It doesn't really matter. I'm naming a screen name that's on public social media. I don't know the person. I don't really care. I'm going to be honest. I've never actually really liked him. The moment I stopped liking him was the moment that he stole my work. So if you're going to do that and operate on social media, which is public, then you're going to have to be prepared for that backlash, right? So I've even had people come to me because of that. But this is the way this type of behavior works. And this person particularly moved on. I think at the end when it all exploded, there were about 20 women he had on the go around the world. But it was always constantly moving the goalposts and saying and creating ideas. Oh, I'll come see you. I'll fly to see you. And then saying, nope, sorry, I never said that. You said you were coming to me. Gaslighting, manipulation, changing the goalposts, all of these things to keep somebody in perpetual state of confusion and making them feel like they're in the wrong, right? Now, this type of behavior here is rooted in a lot of deep insecurity. Now, no matter all the people in the world, no matter all the things he steals in this particular example, that hole inside is never going to be filled, right? Because all that outward confidence, narcissists need constant reassurance for their worth. And they use people and they use control to keep people in their orbit, right? Because otherwise, that whole realm of their own self-importance fades. That facade goes away. And in the lifestyle, this could be especially dangerous because when they weaponize the language of power dynamics to justify their behavior. And they'll say things like, you're supposed to trust me because I'm your dominant, or I'm this writer, or I'm got 50,000 followers, right? I don't care about social media clout. The amount of people follow you doesn't mean anything to me, right? I'm happy for those who want to listen or take my writings or download my work that I provide, all by the way, for free. I don't charge people for these things because that's the whole point of helping, right? But in this example, they tell people, don't ever question me, and they shut down any resistance. Well, over time, enough people start to figure this out. The damage is too widespread, and then what happens, like last year, happens. But he's just one example, and these things happen time and time again. They happen with women, they happen with men, right? And the behavioral patterns between women and men are considerably different. I'm not going to go into all of that today, though. The next one, though, touch more fitting, leads more towards what I call the emotional vampire drama magnet. Now, this person, they live for chaos. There is always a betrayal, a conflict, or an outrage that needs their urgent attention. I can actually think of one person, in an entire continent who thinks they are more special than anybody else on an entire continent. There's no one as popular as them. Always a drama magnet, right? They've always got something to say. Ironically, they're not really into lifestyle, but that's okay. I don't care if people know who I'm talking about. I'll fire shots all day because at the end of the day, I know a lot. I've built a solid reputation, and I know a lot about a lot of different people, especially when people like this, they use not only their words against other people for their drama, then they get their little followers to help and attack people, which just makes it even worse, right? And if there isn't any drama in their life, they manufacture one. And the moment you let them in, you find yourself caught up in the problems that have nothing to do with you. They involve you in groupthink, right? And the moment that happens, if you try to stay neutral, they turn on you. You become the target. And that becomes the bigger issue with something like that. And you're going to ask me, well, what do you mean I'll become the target? Well, they turn on you because you're no longer, they'll claim they're inclusive and everything else, but the moment you stop going with any of their ideas, or you have some sort of independent thought that doesn't align with their goals or what they want, especially with the leader of this drama magnet crew, they will turn on you, they'll ostracize you, they'll attack you, and then they drive you away. Now, at the core with these types of people doesn't often have a low distress tolerance. They struggle with their emotional regulation. They unconsciously create high stimulation environments to distract themselves. This shows up in gossip circles. It's an us versus them conflict, or online call out culture. Let me put out the signal. Let me put up the bat flare, right? All my followers come in to attack an idea. They're always drawn to power struggles. They'll use anything from consent accusations to community politics to stir the pot and keep themselves at the center of attention, all while saying they had nothing to do with it. And like I said, I can think of one person right now on one continent on this planet, apparently because they're the only person on the continent that's worth anything, that does this. I'm not dismissing some of the stuff that they've done, but for the most part, I've read a lot of their stuff, and I don't agree with it, but that's a different story. I don't have to agree with everything that somebody writes. I just know that they're bigger than they think they are. The next type here, the next archetype of this, is the chronic taker. They only reach out when they need something. They want support. They want attention, validation, money. It doesn't matter what it is. They expect you to provide it. The moment you need something, they're nowhere to be found. Relationships, whether these are platonic or romantic, should have some level of balance. With the chronic taker, though, the scales are always tipped in their favor and their favor alone. Now, this type of behavior stems from entitlement or even learned helplessness here. Chronic takers are used to others carrying the emotional or logistical burden for them. They might frame themselves as too overwhelmed to reciprocate, but the reality is they've just never had to. And, when this is left unchecked, they leave a string of exhausted partners, friends, family, or romantic partners in their wake. And they always move on to the next person, willing to give without expecting anything in return, until that changes in that side of that relationship or that dynamic. And then guess what? They move on again. And all of these things, and these kind of little couple of archetypes here that I've given you, they all show up in different variances throughout our community, right? They're hard to spot because they build a lot of deep trust and vulnerability inside of the lifestyle, especially within their own niche communities. We talk about emotional openness and supporting each other, about sharing parts of ourselves that the outside world might not understand. And that's a good thing, but it also means that people who thrive on manipulation can slip through these cracks. And you can see them pretty much everywhere. Maybe it's a mentor who takes advantage of eager newcomers, making them feel like they owe loyalty just for learning from them. Maybe it's a dominant who guilt trips their submissives into staying, that, they frame every issue as the sub's failure to be good enough. Or maybe it's a friend in the scene who constantly leans on others for emotional support, but never offers it in return. The pattern is constantly the same. They take more than they give. And if you challenge them, again, guess what? You're now the victim, or you're now the villain, and they're the victim, right? I want you to think back to your own experiences here within the scene, no matter what community you're in around the world. Have you ever really encountered someone like this that's always seemed to be the center of drama, or who left you feeling exhausted after some sort of conversation? I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts on this. Make sure, again, drop a comment on the show, send me a message on Fetlife or through Gmail. The conversation will keep going on Fetlife about this, right? Because I think it's starting to understand that these are the types of people we run into. And we're going to always run into them. But how we navigate. Now, the moment you turn your backs on these types of people, you free yourself up from drama and exhaustion. Better yet, you don't allow them to thrive on you. Now, as we're moving forward and we started to break down the different ways these people show up, I want to talk about how they operate, how they get in, how they keep people hooked, and the tactics that they use to make sure they always have someone to feed off of. Now, in our community, these types of people are hard to spot, like I mentioned before, because what they do is they get in there, they're really nice, they act all vulnerable, and they create these deep emotional connections. But when they engage in any type of power exchange, mentorship, or just friendships within the scene, they add this layer of emotional intensity that you don't always find in everyday relationships. And these types of people know this, and they use this to their advantage. Now, most of these emotional vampires don't come in showing their true colors right away. They don't walk up and say, "Hey, here, I'm here to manipulate you. I'm here to drain everything you got for my benefit, and then when I'm done, I'm going to walk away." What they do first is they work their way in through a little bit of charm, some intensity. They're a little bit charismatic. They position themselves as deeply in the need of help or guidance, or offering that in return. Sometimes they're going to use love bombing or fast, tracking trust. This is one of the most common tactics that they use. That's love bombing. It's not just romantic relationships here. It happens in friendships, mentorships, casual play dynamics. They shower you with attention. They tell you how special you are, how much they trust you, how they've never met anyone like you. If they're dominant, they might fast track the dynamic. They might push for immediate submission. If they're the submissive, they might act like you're the only person who truly gets them, right? The goal is to create a sense of obligation and emotional dependency before you even had time to step back and evaluate and process whether this connection is healthy or wanted. The next thing they do, their next wonderful tactic, they weaponize vulnerability. Now, inside of our lifestyle, we talk about, or at least I talk about, vulnerability being a strength, and it truly is. But emotional vampires know how to weaponize that. They overshare right away, and they give you deeply personal details about past trauma, abuse, or heartbreak. Not because they want a genuine connection, but because they know when people hear those things, their instinct is to be compassionate and supportive and understanding. And that's what happens with me. Every time I hear these stories, I'm responding in these ways. I'm very compassionate. I try to be supportive and empathetic to a degree. But they use that instinct to create a sense of closeness and to make you feel responsible for their emotional well-being. My God, how draining that is, right? And all of a sudden, you're caught up in their stories, and they're calling you at 2 o'clock in the morning until they feel better, but they don't care that they've left you tired. And the last way they do this is they position themselves as a guide or authority. We just kind of saw some of this unfold a little bit. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but a little bit like this down in Florida, right? I talked about that on the first episode of season 4, right? This type of vampire shows up with a lot of mentors, teachers, and longtime community members. Some emotional vampires don't play the victim role. They go the other way. They present themselves as leaders, right? They tell you they know more than anyone else. They use coercive control, that they've been in the scene for, forever, their favorite word, right? I've got 26 years in. I'm pretty specific because I know pretty much when I entered and how long I've been doing it, right? But the only thing is they're only there to build followers, not connections, right? They want to build their cult. They create an environment where questioning them is seen as disrespectful or not real submission or not real, you know, acquiescence to their dominance if you're another dominant. The second you stop blindly agreeing with them, they turn on you. And that's how they keep you hooked. Because getting in is one thing, but keeping people trapped in the cycle, that's where the emotional vampires here are especially skilled. They don't just manipulate once and move on. They create an environment where people feel stuck, you feel guilty, and you feel too emotionally invested to walk away. Now, thank God, this is why, like, I don't thrive in drama. I can care less about reality TV shows because I don't thrive on that stuff, right? From the Kardashians to the Married at First Sights to the Love Islands to all the other Bachelors, all of those things. I don't get sucked in because that drama for me, I'm not emotionally invested. I don't care. I look at that stuff for what it is, stupidity on TV. But when it's more centralized and it's in our face and not at a distance, they use this guilt and obligation. And if you try to pull back, they always use guilt. They remind you of everything they've shared with you, how much they've opened up and trusted you. They'll say things, I thought you cared about me. I guess I was wrong to trust you. They frame any attempt to set boundaries as an abandonment or a betrayal. And if they've spent time love bombing you or fast tracking that intimacy, you might feel like you owe them something even when you don't, right? The next tactic they use is gaslighting and shifting blame. That's another favorite one that I love hearing about, you know, because gaslighting is a major tool in their arsenal. They rewrite history. They make you doubt your own judgment or act like you're overreacting, right? If you confront them about something hurtful or manipulative that they've done, they'll say, I never said that. You're taking this all the wrong way. They want you to question everything about yourself because the more uncertain you are, the easier it is for them to control you. And that's a major pattern we see with a lot of manipulators. And the final tactic they use here is what we call the push-pull cycle. Now this is the emotional vampires version of reinforcement training. One day they shower you with affection, validation, and attention. The next day they withdraw, they act cold, or they punish you emotionally. This is also known as sometimes intermittent reinforcement. It's kind of got some similarities. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but it's a way, again, to keep you in this cycle. That back and forth creates that psychological effect, right? And this is where people get addicted to the highs and start chasing back after them. And inside of our dynamics, this can be an incredibly destructive idea because it plays directly into the power exchange thought process and what we're doing, making it feel like the submissive or the partner is always trying to earn back the dominant's affection or approval. And if the emotional vampire is a submissive, they might withhold affection or act distant until the dominant gives them more attention, making them feel like they're failing at their role. So, where does this stuff show up? These kinds of people exist everywhere, but in BDSM spaces, they often slip into certain roles where their manipulation can thrive. As a matter of fact, I was just on Fetlife a little while ago, and I was reading posts, and I see it. They use words that really, it's not that I'm at a loss here. You can hear the exasperation in my voice because I see these same things. They'll you need to decolonize yourself, and I'm not going to decolonize my thought process because I don't think in the way that colonizers do, because we've already colonized the planet, right? That's just the whole thing is. I'm sorry, there's a lot of it that's just rooted in stupidity, but they use these tactics for guilt and attack, and this is how they operate, and this is why I tune out of it or I don't get involved in these conversations, because it's kind of like beating my head against a wall, because it's pointless. These people aren't going to ever change. They're the perpetual victims that I don't want to get involved into talking to, because they actually don't want help. They just want to be the victim, right? And there's a lot of people who know, but for most who don't, it's I have family members that are like that. I've cut them out of my life. It's a very unhealthy place to be, right? Now, I know I've gotten a little off track here, but let's get back into here how they kind of thrive in some of our spaces and the most common places you're going to find these people. First, you're going to find them without a doubt on social media and online groups, right? Fetlife, Discord, Instagram, Facebook groups, Reddit, right? I've seen it. I've seen it all there. Because they come in, they stir up the drama, they create divisions, and they always seem to be in the middle of some sort of conflict. Why? Because they love the attention, and online platforms give them a constant supply of it. And that's all that really happens. They don't have anything outside of that online presence, but that's what they use to thrive, right? The next area is the munches and local events. And this is where they look for new people who don't really know the community well enough to recognize the red flags yet. They position themselves here as an experienced guide or a safe person to pull their targets into unhealthy dynamics, right? Some of these people become mentors and they use their knowledge as leverage. Instead of teaching with integrity, they use their position to create followers who rely on them instead of thinking for themselves. That reminds me of a cult leader, and I see that again quite often. I'm going to say this to all of you. I appreciate every one of you who follows me, who's offered me feedback on my work, downloaded my stuff, comments on what I write, and to those who have donated to me. But I have never once encouraged anybody, and I never would, to not think for themselves, and even the people I work with. Right? And I'm never going to ask them to stand up and say anything. But if they could, I don't coddle behavior. I teach people how to take responsibility and change their behavior so it's healthy. Because that's where change is. But these people don't want to do that. What they want to do is they want to keep you in the fold. They want to grow their ranks. So they kind of ascend to this godlike status. Well, they're not infallible. And eventually their cracks show. And the last place these people show up is personal dynamics and relationships. I kind of covered this for the most part, but the one-on-ones, the dominants who manipulate, or the submissives who create this endless emotional crisis, no matter what it is, somebody's always putting out a fire and then the next one's already starting, right? They want support, but they never offer it. And the reality is, if any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Emotional vampires thrive in these spaces day in and day out, right? Where people can care deeply, and then they know, because our community is built on that trust and that connection, that they're going to thrive. Maybe you can think back and go, hey, I know a person like this, or I know someone who used to make me feel like this. No matter what I did, it was just never enough. If you've got that story or some insight, let me know in the comments section. Keep that story going. I want to talk about that on social media so others can understand. Maybe we're not only preventing somebody else from running into it, or through discussion, we're also healing from it. But now that I've talked about how they operate, I want to get to the most important part, protecting ourselves. And how do we recognize all of these behaviors early? How do we set those boundaries and avoid getting caught up in their cycle? Let's talk about that. Now that I've kind of explained their patterns, where they come from, let's get to how we really do guard ourselves against these types of people. Because at the end of the day, you can't control how other people behave, but you control how much they have access to you and how you respond. The key here isn't just recognizing these signs, but knowing how to respond in a way that keeps you from getting pulled into their cycle. Emotional vampires thrive on access to your energy, your emotions, your willingness to engage. The more access you give them, the more they drain. So protecting yourself here isn't about spotting them. It's about making sure you don't open the door enough for them so they can take advantage. The first step you need to understand here is protecting yourself is recognizing when the interaction is starting to leave you drained. And there's a couple of key signs here that you're dealing with them. You're exhausted or tired after talking to them. You feel guilty for not responding fast enough or giving them enough. You start questioning yourself more than normal after any interactions. And the biggest one, you notice a pattern. They are always in crisis. And if you recognize these things, Take a step back and ask yourself, am I getting anything out of this relationship, or am I just being drained? And this is where boundaries come in, because if you set clear boundaries and you stick to them, the emotional vampires here, they need to thrive on blurred lines. They push, they test, they see how much they can get away with. But if you've got a boundary and it's firm and non-negotiable, they know they're not getting in and they're going to move on, right? A great boundary here is you don't owe anyone unlimited emotional labor. You don't owe anyone the ability or the need to be available to them 24/7. And finally, it's okay to stop engaging when you realize you're being manipulated. Now, this is a favorite concept of mine. It's called JADE. Don't justify, argue, defend, or explain. And this is where emotional vampires love to keep you talking, because the more you talk, the more they can twist your words, guilt trip you, or pull you back in, right? The moment you justify why you need space and arguing about whether they've really done anything wrong, or you defend your feelings or explain yourself over and over again, they've got you where they want you, because you're engaging. They don't care about the actual answer. They just want a conversation to keep going so they can keep wearing you down. Instead of jading with them, keep your boundaries short and firm. If they want an explanation from you, try like a response like this. I'm not available for this conversation. Sorry. I don't have the energy for this right now. I've made up my own mind. I've made my decision. Or my favorite, I'm not discussing this any further. Because the less you say, the harder it is for them to manipulate you. And you have to recognize when not every battle is worth fighting. God, I've encountered this. Sometimes the best thing to do is disengage completely. Emotional vampires need our reactions. If they don't get one, they'll lose interest or they move on. So here's some tips for detachment. Lower your emotional investment. Respond with neutrality, right? A phrase like, God, that sounds tough, or hope things get better, gives them nothing to latch onto. Reduce your interaction time. Don't spend a whole lot of time with them, right? Or the final one, the go, no contact if necessary. If they don't want to respect your boundaries, cut ties. Block them, mute them, remove them from your life. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe them access to your life, right? The best way to keep these types of people from taking up space in your life is to fill that space with people who actually want to lift you up, right? Ask yourself, who in your life makes you feel energized instead of drained? Who respects you instead of constantly testing your limits? Who offers support instead of just taking? When you surround yourself with healthy people, emotional vampires become easier to spot, because they'll stand out as the ones pulling from you instead of adding quality to your life. Now, at the end of the day, emotional vampires only have one power when we allow them access. The reality is you're not responsible for fixing or saving them, or carrying someone who refuses to take any personal responsibility for their own emotional state or actions. It's fine that you care about people, but you don't need to care to the point without becoming their emotional crutch. You can be supportive without letting someone drain you dry. Boundaries aren't just about keeping toxic people out. They're about making room for the right people and protecting ourselves against mistakes that we could potentially make. The ones who respect you, who give you as much as they take, who don't make you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, those are the people you want to invest in. Those are the connections you want to grow, all right? And that allows you to be with people who create an environment that leaves you less exhausted and more fulfilled. Now, I really want to hear your thoughts on this. You know, if you've ever had to even maybe walk away from someone who was draining you, what was that moment that kind of made you realize this was enough? Drop me a comment, put it in the comment section here on Spotify, send me an email, put a message up on social media. Let me know. I always appreciate hearing your different perspectives on all of this stuff. Now, I did promise you today, and I've got my update. I'm so super excited to tell you guys about this. Now, I'm not going to drag this out for 20 minutes. I'm going to get right to the point, right? Next week, or this week, I'm going to be sitting down. I told you that this is someone that everybody knows, especially if you're on a place like Fetlife. This week, I am organizing a conversation to talk to the one, the only creator of Fetlife. You all know him as John Baku, right? So, I'm not approaching this conversation. This is not a gotcha thing for me. This is an honest sit down. I'm actually very curious about different aspects. I don't know. Honestly, I haven't written my questions out that I'm going to send to him so we can have some talking points to go over what we're going to talk about. This is not going to be the typical interviews that I've seen. We all know why he started Fetlife. There's other questions I'm going to ask, and I'm starting to formulate them in my mind. But I want you all to know that conversation, that interview, that's coming. That's going to happen. Hopefully it's going to happen this week. When that does, then I'll drop it. We'll go from there. If there are some questions, I will allow you to email me privately. I'm not going to take any harsh comments. I'm not looking to why. I'm not asking him why he did something. I'm not the representative of the community at all. Right? But I'll entertain some stuff. If you have some things you think you'd like me to ask him and I feel it's appropriate, I'll ask. If you email me something dumb, and I've gotten these before, I'm going to disregard it. Right? Because I'm not going to talk about stuff. I'm not going to do mathematics questions or anything else. And anybody who knows me knows what I'm talking about, especially in regards to something like the new metric system, which I've had to explain. And I'm not even a member of Fetlife, right? So if you have some stuff and you'd like me to ask, send me some options for something you'd love for me to engage in with John, right? I'm super excited for this. I'm super excited to share this with you all, and I'm super excited to put this one out hopefully next week. It depends how long our conversation goes and how much time it takes me to edit and all that stuff, but hopefully that interview will drop next week. So let me know what you thought about today's show. It's about emotional vampire. I don't want my show to be all about John, right? This is about emotional vampires. So let me know what you think about the show, your thoughts, anything else, all right? If you do have questions for my upcoming interview, please let me know. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay tuned.